talking about what? So these are the ways that Lindsay and I are thinking about these terms. And so, as we use them throughout our presentation today, that these are how we're thinking of these terms. So we look at patient family-centered care as the culture of care, or the model, if you will, the noun, right? It's that culture that we're trying to embed across the health system, and across health system activities and across health system settings. It's where we're all moving towards the model. So with that in mind, we think then about patient-family engagement as that active strategy. So it becomes the verb. How do we get to that model? How do we build that? The things that we're doing, the partnership, the conversations we're having, the challenges that we're having together. So when we think about patient-family engagement in that way, we can then apply that strategy to whatever we're working on, whether those are quality improvement efforts, whether those are efforts to improve patient safety, or whether those are improvements at towards improving the patient experience and HCAHPS scores. Whatever outcome we're looking towards, developing meaningful measures, developing research that's of use and improves the quality of life outcomes for patients and families. This engagement can be a strategy that gets layered on to everything else that we're doing. So again, these are not the end all and be all. Our colleagues at IPFCC and National Academy of Medicine and others have much more academic definitions. These are sort of the hit the ground running definitions that we use to guide our work at PFCC Partners. All right, I think we can move on from there. So we keep hearing about patient-family advisors. Who are they? And there, I will acknowledge that there are lots of different terms. We hear folks with being referred to as subject matter experts, or patient partners, or patient-family caregiving partners. And this is an extended definition that was written collaboratively by a group of folks serving in that role back in 2012 that were convened at the IHI Forum. I will say, with all of that terminology floating, again, we oversimplify over here, but it's essentially people using their lived experience with the healthcare system to influence the healthcare system in one way or another. So that it should just be grounding in terms of who we're talking about. We're talking about patients and families who have lived experience in your healthcare setting, whether you're at a hospital, whether you're at an ambulatory center, whether you're in a quality improvement organization, a research team, a measure developer, or whoever else, right? It's anyone who's coming, and my value, and you all, I think I know most of the folks on the call at this point, you all know that I come from the perspective of a patient-family advisor. That's what I have. And that's my expertise, my lived experience in the healthcare system. And how do I bring that forward in a way that brings value and influences the healthcare system? All right, just a couple of level setting items there. Excuse me. So who are these patient-family advisors talking to? They're talking to all of you. When they're talking to the folks on the call who are facilitating what we call facilitating patient-family advisory efforts. So for those of you who are in the hospital environment, you're working in the HIN work, these are the PFE leads, right? Or the point person. These are the people that are organizing the effort to partner with patient-family advisors. So the folks that are creating the agendas, are creating the connections to senior leadership or projects within an organization. They're the folks that the advisors know as the lead. They're the folks that the organization knows as the touch point for patient-family engagement efforts. So that's the role that we'll be talking about a little primarily today. But I think one of the things that is helpful to think about is, what about the other staff members who are involved in a PFAC meeting or a convening of some sort? We often have multiple other staff members, and so I think it's really useful, again, having been experienced in the advisory role since the mid-90s and having lots and lots of very highly effective advisory committee convenings and less effective. I think it's very helpful for organizations to think of these roles distinctly. So you have your facilitator, but we should also have a note taker, someone who's really just capturing all of the content. It is incredibly hard and detracts from the quality of the meeting if the facilitator is trying to be all of these things at the same time. And then one thing that is a little bit unique to our approach is we really encourage you to have a listener or an observer of the meeting. So a staff member who is knowledgeable about the goals and the vision and the charter of the advisory program, but who really has the task of observing the meeting so that you're getting that overview of the whole group and the group dynamics. That's really important because some of the challenges that we'll talk about a little bit later, some of those are with individual advisors, but a lot of those are with group dynamics. So we want to have someone who's kind of got that lens on the entire group. And sometimes that person can identify subtleties within the group dynamics, and that allows you as a facilitator to get ahead of those a little bit, pull off one or another for an individual conversation. I'll give you an example. We had one organization that had bilingual Spanish-speaking family members as part of their English-speaking Patient Family Advisory Council. And so this observer was able to see that although this person was bilingual and had very good English, that she was kind of sidelined a bit. And so was able to address that offline in a phone call and able to provide just a little bit more support with the language. And that allowed this individual to then become more involved in the group and more influential, if you will, in bringing her ideas forward. So that's the value of sort of the listener. But with that, I will turn it back to Lindsay to take us a little bit deeper into that facilitator role.
Thank you so much, Libby. So going back to that facilitator role, what I wanted to do was first start with the definition of a facilitator. And this is from the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. And I have a resource for you at the end of this presentation. It's a really great document that kind of outlines the role of a facilitator, what a good facilitator looks like, what a not so good facilitator, some of those activities that we don't want to do. And so I wanted to bring this definition forward to all of you that you can kind of read through. But I also wanted to call out a few of the points within this definition, and the first being content neutral. And I know it can be really hard as an advisory council facilitator to remain content neutral when you have this background and understanding about the organization that you work for. And then you have patient family advisors coming in and providing their lived experiences that might not be the same as what you have experienced as a staff member. So it can be really hard to try to remain content neutral and not to defend your organization. I remember back when I was an advisor facilitator, we had patient family advisors onto multiple process improvement teams. And I kind of facilitated their activities and participated in the meetings that they were a part of. But we had one improvement team that was focused on glycemic control in the hospitals that were part of this region. And so glycemic control is managing patients' blood sugars while they're in the hospital. We had an advisor join that improvement team who had, I forget the type, but had diabetes, and she had experiences in the hospital where they were testing her blood sugars to make sure that they were normal or where they were at, because you really want them to remain normal, especially when they're in the hospital. And so the advisor explained how she managed her own diabetes and then how the nurses kind of went through their process in the hospital to go through the testing for the glycemic control to make sure that it was in control. And on that particular team, there was also a nurse who worked for the organization and went on to explain how the advisor should be taking care of her diabetes, which was a little bit different than what she had explained. And then the nurse also went on to explain how the process works within the organization, which was very different from what the advisor had experienced. So as a facilitator and as a staff person working with advisors, it's hard not to defend your organizations and the processes that happen within the organization, but it is really important to take that in and listen to it. And instead of defending, work together with the advisors and understand how we can move forward and how we can work together to really improve the experience that advisor had for other patients and families behind them. And then I also wanted to call out a learning guide or a dialogue guide to assist the conversation and assist the group in really thinking together. So if you think about yourself as a facilitator, more of a guide and guiding conversations and guiding the agenda of whatever particular meeting that you're facilitating, that can really help to keep you on track and keep you remaining content neutral and just kind of see where those conversations go and listen. You can really learn a lot by listening as well. And here we have some responsibilities of a facilitator of an advisory council or an advisory program, like I had just explained that we had at the last organization I was with. So the first is really setting expectations. As a facilitator of an advisory council, ensuring that all of your activities that the patient family advisors are involved in connects with the goals and the strategic priorities of the organization. Patient family engagement really is that strategy for organizational improvement. So being able to ensure that all of those activities advisors are involved in are connected to the organization. In that way, the advisors will feel really invested in their role because they can see that they're having an impact at a really high level. And then on the other side, the organization will really invest more in those advisors and the work that they're doing because they can see that improvement is directly connected to those strategic goals, and the advisors who are providing their perspectives and really getting involved, they had a big part to do with that. So definitely connecting all of those activities with the goals is really important. And then preparing the advisors to partner as well. I'm sure a lot of you facilitators have also delivered orientation. So just ensuring that your orientation materials for your patient family advisors, it covers that, the strategic goals. So the advisors have a really good understanding of what the organization is looking to improve and how they want to partner with me as a patient family advisor to reach those goals. And then the advisor role in itself is a really, really important part of that preparation. And I'm sure a lot of you know this as well. Just ensuring that the advisors understand how that relationship is going to work, that coming to this with an open mind and establishing partnerships and just being really open to what we can learn together, remaining focused on those solutions and how we're going to get there. All of those pieces to prepare advisors to partner effectively with the organization are another part of the facilitator's responsibility as well. And then going along with that preparation, preparing advisory council meeting agendas. Especially for new advisory councils, the facilitator really needs to take the lead on developing the agendas for advisory councils. As a facilitator and a staff member of the organization, you have a really good idea of some of those strategic goals and some concepts and conversations that you can start to have with your advisors when your advisory council and your advisors are really new to the role. But once your advisors start to kind of learn more about your organization, learn more about their role as an advisor, they can then start to inform the agenda as well. Maybe in those first couple of meetings, there were some really good ideas and projects that they were thinking of that were starting to align with some of the strategic goals of your organization. And so you can start to use some of those ideas, add them to the agenda, start those conversations, start working on some projects. And continue going forward. But in the beginning, preparing those meetings as a facilitator helps to guide the advisory council. And then, again, connect that work of the advisory council to the organization's strategic priorities. And finally, as a facilitator, some of those responsibilities are all around communication. I think communication is key to being a really effective facilitator. So for the meeting, sharing agendas ahead of time, that's another part of preparing the patient family advisors for those meetings so they can prepare their ideas and their thoughts around certain subjects or topics based on that agenda is really helpful. And then sharing the success with the organization. And by successes, I mean like really small wins. So maybe the advisory council completed a project, project that looked at the discharge process, and maybe they helped create this new discharge process that really made sense to patients and families, and they were able to partner with the organization to do so. Any way that you can, share that with the organization to continue to build that buy-in and create enthusiasm around your program. I know there's one organization that we've worked with in the past that has a monthly newsletter that goes out to the organization, and in each of those newsletters, they highlight one advisor per month to share what they have been involved in, what kind of projects they've been involved in, maybe a little bit about their healthcare experience if they want to share, but anything that you can do to share the successes of your advisory council with the organization to create that excitement, create a broader understanding of what the advisors are working on, can just continue to grow your program as well. And then finally, follow up is key. Was there a comment?
Yeah, Lindsay, I was just going to jump in too, and really, it's great if you can finish a project like a discharge planning, and certainly celebrate that broadly. But maybe it's just the fact that you got the case management staff to come to the PFAC meeting. That's a win to start the conversation. So think of those breadcrumbs that get you to the big projects or the slightly bigger projects as well. Sorry, just got too excited. Wanted to jump in.
No, that's a great point, because when we were first getting started at my last organization, we celebrated the fact that we got an advisor on board. That was a big, a big little win for us. So all those small wins can really take you far if you continue to celebrate them. Great point. Okay, and so we talked a little bit about setting expectations as well in the last slide, but just to kind of expand on that, a few other expectations to start to set for your advisory council as a facilitator from the beginning and throughout your relationships with your advisors and your advisory council. First, connecting the meetings. So each meeting, you're going to have action items, you're going to have things that you want to get done between the meetings. So with each meeting, ensure that you're connecting the meeting to the actions that you have completed, and then the ones that you plan to complete in that next period between those two meetings. This helps to close that communication loop, which is really important. So in the advisory council meetings, advisors are providing their experiences really in the context of whatever project or topic that you're talking about in your council. So what is being done with that feedback? What is being done with their shared perspective and ideas? It's really important to bring that up and close that communication loop in your next meeting, and continue to do that moving forward through all of the rest of your advisory council meetings to, again, show the advisors that they are having an impact and things are getting done within the organization, so they continue to show up and be really active members. And then also with your council, setting the expectation that this is a dynamic group, especially going back to really new advisory councils, being open and sharing that this is an all teach and all learn process, that we're learning together on how to partner effectively as well, especially for those new councils, like I mentioned, and even existing councils, continuing to be open to teaching each other and learning from each other can only continue to build that momentum of the activities of your council as well. We talked about agenda setting for facilitators. So also setting the expectation that advisors will, if you are a new council, advisors will start to inform the agendas and help you as a facilitator set those agendas in the next couple of months once they kind of sit into their role a little bit, understand your organization a little bit more. And then finally, evaluating your meetings can be really helpful to continue to see how you can improve them. I'm also a facilitator for the National Health Information Technology Advisory Council in partnership with Open Notes, and we evaluated our first couple of meetings, and I learned so much from those evaluations. I learned that we needed to stay on track. I learned that we needed a tighter agenda to keep us on track. So evaluating just your meetings can be helpful to help you continue to improve. And then also as a facilitator of a existing council, maybe your council has been in place for a year or 2 years, evaluating the advisor's perspective of the council and all of its activities. Do they think that we're connecting to the strategic goals of the organization? Do they feel like they have a voice? Doing that sort of evaluation with your advisors can also be really beneficial and help you look back to maybe your advisory council charter, all the expectations that you set in the past, and look back and think, is this still making sense to us, to our advisors, to the organization, and to our advisory council? And we actually have a resource. It's a patient family advisor evaluation of an advisory council that we can share with all of you as well.
And I'll just jump in here too. I can't reiterate how important it is to evaluate from both perspectives, both the staff and the patient family advisor. And I think that's sometimes an overlooked opportunity to see kind of, again, the more information you have, the more you can be responsive to it.
Yep, great point. Okay, and then continuing on with some more facilitation skills from that participatory decision-making facilitator's guide. These were a few pieces that I pulled out that really kind of stuck with me as a facilitator that I wanted to share with all of you as well, and kind of connect them to how to facilitate an advisory council. So first, with full participation, in a council that has full participation, all members are really encouraged to speak up and say what's on their minds. This definitely strengthens the council because then members can become maybe a little more stronger or courageous to really share or raise any difficult issues or experiences that they've had. And then that being really open and leaving that openness and full participation open on your council meetings will really leave the space for advisors to kind of share those kind of spitballing ideas that they have based on some of their experiences and then their knowledge about your organization. And you can really start to establish partnerships in that way to have full participation from everyone on your council and setting the expectation that everyone is a full participant in all of your council meetings. And then going to mutual understanding, in order for an advisory council or an advisory program to reach a sustainable agreement, the members of that group really need to understand and accept one another's needs and goals. That's why advisor preparation is so important, so they can really understand the goals of the advisory council. And then also that advisor role preparation. So ensuring that everyone has a teachable spirit and they're open to hearing other ideas that may be much different than their own, but at least they have that openness to learn, to share their own ideas as well. And then moving to some of those inclusive solutions. This is from the Facilitator's Guide by Sam Tanner. He mentions that Quakers say everybody has a piece of truth. And that can't be more true in advisory councils as well. So when we share a lot about the core competencies of effective advisors, and I'm kind of connecting those here with these facilitation skills, but one of them is remaining solution focused and really having an understanding that what the group produces together is better than what just one person would come up with. So everybody being able to include their ideas and have them part of that solution is really important to the effectiveness of a council as well. And then finally, as a facilitator, ensuring that you as a council have a shared responsibility of the outcomes of that council. So a lot of ways that I've seen other councils do this is by really including the entire council in goal setting for the group. So I know with the National IT PFAC that I mentioned before, the beginning of this year, we had a meeting, a 90-minute meeting, but we took that whole meeting and just planned out our objectives for the year and our key results. So those activities to how we were going to reach those objectives. And everyone had a say, we came to mutual understanding and agreement to those key objectives, but everyone had that say, and that really created that kind of shared responsibility for the outcomes of the council for the year. And then beyond that, I went ahead and asked for volunteers who wanted to work on some of those goals or some of those objectives. And we had a few volunteers step up, and we're working on one project. It's creating the perfect patient portal from the patient's perspective. And so we have a few advisors kind of taking the lead on helping us get more broad information about that, which also, again, creates more shared responsibility of the council and the goals and outcomes of that. Okay, so now I'm going to share this video. It's facilitation best and worst practices. This is kind of from a business meeting facilitation side of things, but there are a lot of really good points that can be related to an advisory council facilitator as well. So I'm going to share this. I need to reshare my screen. Over here.
Facilitation is about making it easier for groups of people to understand each other's point of view. So sit back for a few moments and put aside responding to those urgent emails as we share some of the good stuff with you and highlight the poor practices you ought to be on the lookout for. And may your business meetings be forever improved. The best facilitators carefully assess the needs of those in the meeting. They treat participants equally and work hard to stay neutral in all discussions. A good facilitator knows how to use a wide range of process tools, but they'll have to be a story for another day, as there are just too many to review in this short video. Getting back to best practices. A good facilitator creates an open and trusting atmosphere and helps participants understand why they're there. They listen intently in order to fully understand what's being said, and when speaking themselves, use simple, direct language. Good facilitators work to make participants the center of attention and take notes that accurately reflect what participants mean. Contrast this with some traits of bad facilitators. These are the things to watch out for and avoid in your own business meetings whenever possible. Poor facilitators want to be the center of attention. They don't really bother checking in with the participants and seeing whether they have any concerns. They often fail to listen and end up losing track of key ideas. They also tend to be overly passive on process and let things amble on. Ever been in a meeting like that? Why, you end up asking yourself, just what is going on here? Why are we doing all this? You raise your concern and the facilitator puts you down? Yep, right there is another trait of bad facilitators. They put people down and get defensive, often about some relatively minor process issue. Meetings run by these facilitators often end up being dominated by the team leader or some other strong voice. Poor facilitators take poor notes. Poor notes lead to poor decisions, often based on what wasn't said. In fact, poor facilitators can be so preoccupied with making their poor notes that they fail to check how the meeting is going and seem to be totally oblivious as to when to take a break. The very worst facilitators tend to push ahead with an irrelevant agenda, having no alternative approaches to offer, and criminally let discussions ramble on and on and on and on without proper closure, which is, of course, a complete waste of everybody's time, so don't go there. Good facilitators are willing to champion ideas they don't personally favor and find ways of concluding meetings on an optimistic note. In their concluding remarks, good facilitators make sure their meetings end with clear steps for the next meeting, ensuring that everybody is up to speed and understands what they have to do. So there you have it, a quick resume of the best and worst facilitator practices. Active Presence offers comprehensive facilitation skills training.
I'm sure, of course, that nobody is multitasking or wondering why we're here today, because this is such a wonderfully facilitated.
Yes, that is the goal. And I was going to say, I know that I have portrayed some of those worst practices of a facilitator, and that is kind of the only way that I've learned to overcome some of those, and learned with the advisors that I've partnered with before and people that I've worked with on certain meetings to overcome some of those. And so really excited now to get into some of those challenges. I myself can share some of my personal experiences as well. So I'd like to invite Libby on, and we're going to talk about some lessons learned in facilitation that kind of go along with some of those best and worst practices as well.
So Lindsay, I really applaud your journey in learning facilitation. And I think that there's a lot of great tools and resources out there. And when we think about, in this unique setting, how do we adapt these facilitation skills into this unique setting of patient-family advisory councils, where we've got folks in the room with differing backgrounds, differing interests, differing educations, and cultural influences. And so how do we facilitate that in an effective way that becomes really high value? And I think it's a learning journey for all of us. And I've gotten some great comments and great ideas in the chat box. So I encourage you to keep talking with one another as well. But Lindsay, like, you've been on this great journey, and it's been my pleasure to kind of be a bit of a guide for you, but really just watching you bloom. I mean, what's one of the things that surprised you about facilitating with your advisors?
That's a good question. And when I first started facilitating, I kind of felt like I needed to have all of the answers. I felt like I needed to give them all of the information that they needed. And I wasn't listening as much as I should, because I was trying to feed the advisors I was working with all of this information because I thought that they needed it. And so I really learned just from watching great facilitators like you, Libby, and listening to myself facilitate. I've had to listen to myself talk a lot through this entire journey as well. And even just asking the advisors that I've worked with in the past too, like, how could we improve? How can I improve? I've really learned to listen and kind of read between the lines of the responses to certain questions to then be able to fill in the information that will actually be helpful and contribute to conversations and ideas, instead of just assuming that I knew everything that the advisors needed to know.
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing, right? Because we want to give advisors enough context that they can be functional, and so we need some of those orientation pieces. But I think it's so smart to think about how we open space for advisors to let us know as facilitators what more information they need. And I love the idea of kind of listening between the lines, because advisors aren't as familiar with your organization. They might be talking around the concept of, how do you do improvement in your organization? And when you're listening intently, you can hear that and say, oh, we have this structure within the hospital that's just sole purpose is to create improvement. So when you're listening really deeply in that way, you're listening for, in the well-used analogy from Wayne Gretzky, you're listening for the space, not where the hockey puck is, but where it could be going. And so I love that concept.
I agree. And I think to get to that space, you have to be able to ask the right questions as well. And I have struggled with that. I've done a lot of interviews as well. And I struggle with asking the close-ended questions, the yes or no. You don't get a lot of information about that. And what I've learned even recently through some other education that I've been doing is really that the way you ask a question signifies the type of response that you're going to receive. So asking more open-ended questions that start with could you, how would you, what would you, those types of starts are really key to getting more information from your participants. And then also providing those prompting questions ahead of time. So through your agendas allows the advisors to think about those a little bit more and think about their responses. So they bring those to the meeting, and then you can have this really rich conversation with everyone that are really prepared.
So it's so important the way that we construct those questions. You're right. It's that's something I probably struggle with quite a bit, because oftentimes I find myself asking leading questions. So I'm asking questions in a way to get to the point where I really want them to say that. And so I'm always challenged to keep it very open-ended so that, you know, my preconceived ideas and notions aren't influencing the responses that we're getting from the advisors. I think one of my favorite open-ended questions is, just tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about XYZ. You know, it just really kind of opens the space.
I agree.
And then one thing I remember early on when you were beginning and facilitating, you were very uncomfortable with quiet. And I think that's human nature, to be uncomfortable with quiet. We want to be embracing of everybody. We want to make everybody feel comfortable, and quiet is somehow counterintuitive to that. And so this is where I see a lot of teams really packing the agenda. You know, we've got to have 49 things because we don't want quiet, right? So how to talk a little bit about how you worked yourself out of not appreciating silence, and what impact has that had since you've been able to do that?
Yeah, I definitely was scared of silence. It probably just straight up frightened me. I didn't like it. I didn't want any of it. And so I filled every second I could with just something that was probably an irrelevant agenda item, like we saw in that video, that wasn't making sense. It wasn't contributing, only because I didn't want that silence. It gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it sometimes. But I have learned not to be afraid of it. I've learned that silence time that you're kind of leaving, that open space, it actually allows people to think about what you're asking. It allows them to formulate their own ideas and brainstorm by themselves for a second or two, so that they can have a really educated, or not a response that they thought about in that silence. So that took me a long time to learn that that's what people were doing while they were being quiet. But then on the other side, I also realized that there are people who may be a little bit more timid and don't want to speak up. And I learned this back when I was facilitating the advisory council at my last organization. And there were some more quiet advisors. And I learned that just calling on them, saying, "Hey, Kathy, I see you're kind of thinking a lot over there, but you're being kind of quiet. What do you think about this topic?" And just leaving that open space for someone who may be a little timid, a little more quiet, to come into the conversation. And then you get these incredible ideas and such bright responses, but they just needed that invitation to come into the conversation as well. And so that was another thing that I learned about kind of the silence, and giving advisors an opportunity to share, because you can always tell when somebody's wheels are turning. And so bringing them into the conversation has really helped a lot as well. And it helps with that silence too.
Yeah. It's so true. I think when we leave a little bit of space, we end up getting very reflective contributions. And when we close that space, we get very reflexive contributions. And I think the reflective holds a bit more value for the long term and the sustainability of the advisory efforts.
Definitely. That's a great way to put it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey. You've come so far and doing so great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there are, however, admittedly, some challenges in this work. And before we get into some of the more common ones that we hear in working with many teams that are engaging patients and families, I want to get to a couple that I saw in the chat box because I want to be responsive to the group that took time to join us today. One, I'm going to work a little bit backwards, I think. One is around that emeritus. So we've got a very well-established advisory program. I think you said it was 8 years old, and you're now moving it forward as you should and engaging new members with fresh perspectives. Really important, but you want to hold on to the wisdom of the folks, or at least some of the folks that you've had in that emeritus role, and what does that look like? And we're learning more about that role, which is exciting because it's an indicator that these programs are sustaining longer and longer. So how do we identify folks that would be valuable in that role versus sort of a retirement effort? I would encourage you to look at the core competencies of patient-family advisors, the triangle that's on our website with ability to establish partnerships, to be constructively collaborative, solution-focused, representative, and teachable spirit. And what we've done in the past is evaluate advisors and encourage them to evaluate themselves on those competencies and see, sort of where they are. And then match those competencies to what kinds of activities you're going to be having the emeritus folks get involved in. If they're going to be speaking on your organization's behalf in more regional and national efforts, then you want to definitely make sure they can be representative. And have a strong sense of those criteria. So I hope that's helpful in one way to look at it. But really, and similarly, if you're not familiar or comfortable with the core competencies of advisors, those were developed by advisors for advisors. But if you've given any criteria, evaluate them on their competencies in that way. Great. I'm glad that was helpful. And I would think about, I would love for us to learn as a community more about the emeritus role, and we'll think about putting together some programming around that as well. Okay, so the other thing I heard was, how do we keep our advisors excited about things when it takes so long to demonstrate improvement or move things forward? I think that can really be answered with infrastructure. So Lindsay mentioned it a little bit earlier, and for those of you who are familiar with PFCC Partners, we run on a system of objectives and key results, OKRs. You can Google that term. And so what we have are the overlying objectives, and we've done a previous workshop on these, so you might look at the resources online on our website. And it really, what it does is, the objectives are the strategic goals of the organizations. Then the key results get developed with the advisors, and those are the specific activities that you're going to do XYZ by when. And that way, you look at that every month, you can see the baby steps within that much more clearly than you can, if advisors are commenting or making a set of recommendations about the discharge process, and they just don't even hear about it for months and months, or they just hear, it's going through the process, what are the steps that they can do in the interim, and building in those key results allows them to see more easily those steps. The other thing is really articulating the complexity of your organization, and as part of the orientation. So before you get into the project stuff, as part of the orientation, show your advisors how things move through your organization. What kinds of, first it goes to the medical executive council, and then it has to get approval from the C-suite, and then it has to go to legal to make sure we're all okay there. So share the process that's taking so long. That's the other part is, as advisors, we get excited about moving things forward, and we don't have the insight as to how your organization works. So put that out on the table and be really transparent with that. And then lastly, I would say, are there other low-hanging fruit that your advisors could get involved in the meantime that might support a successful discharge process, but maybe don't require the level of approvals and complexities? So structure, demonstrating transparency, demonstrating the complexity of moving something forward, and then looking for interim small wins that you can promote. All right.
And Libby, I don't know if you had another challenge that you had seen a little bit earlier, but there was a question in the chat box from Teresa. She says, do you think that having a strict agenda each and every month can cause members to be disengaged, especially if the members have had input?
So listening between the lines on your question, Teresa, and what I'm hearing is if you've got a strict agenda that's packed, then it's what you're giving versus an open-ended agenda that has a good balance that provides for the input from the advisors. And so it's really kind of a balance. An agenda that's overly packed is going to get burdensome, especially if there's no loop back, like Mike Adamson in the chat box is saying. And they have departments that have come to us for input, but then come back. And that closing the loop is critically important for maintaining that motivation. So I hope that answers your questions. If I'm not getting it right, feel free to chat in some more. Great. Okay, so some of the group challenges, and we're going to go from group to individual. Again, the motivation. How do we keep our advisors interested in what we're working on? We don't have a lot of discussion. It's difficult to pull ideas out from the group. So troubleshoot that. Is it that you're working on a project that is out of alignment with what's important to the organization? Advisors want to bring value to your organization. So make sure that what you're working on lines up with the strategic goals of the organization so that we know we're feeding the goals, right? We know that over time, I'm sure with that 8-year-old advisory council, that they start to influence the goals of the organization. But in either case, they need to be directly linked. And so when they find value in a project, it's because they see clearly the line of sight to how they're going to add to the strategic goals. An advisory council recently experienced a traumatic event. This happened 3 times this month, where we had advisors who either lost a loved one at the hospital or advisors who passed away themselves. I know that nobody wants to talk about this, but you guys, this happens where advisors, we have lived experience because oftentimes we have chronic illness. So I really want you to be thoughtful about this before it happens, because getting a policy put into your charter whereby we have some space and time built in right from the start. If we have a loss, we're gonna take 6 months or a year or whatever it might be. Oftentimes the advisor is concerned because that's become part of their support system, right? And so they, losing the contact with that group at the same time that they've lost a loved one is very difficult to think about. And so it's not abandoning that person or holding them at arm's length. Keep in touch, help them get the support they need in the community, the bereavement support. But they're not going to be able to be part of the advisory council for a period of time. But get in front of that. Once it happens, it's very difficult to deal with in a way that doesn't feel personal. So again, get in front of that. And I know none of us want to think about this stuff, but this is the reality of the work that we're doing together, and that's really important. As a facilitator, I get this a lot. As a facilitator, I'm having trouble coming up with things that we can work on, that the council can work on. I don't know any of you working in healthcare who are lacking things to do. So when I hear this, it often tells me that the council is too far afield of what's valuable to the organization. So bring it back to the strategic goals, see how closely the things you're working on aligns to and provides feeds solutions to those strategic goals. And then I think you'll see that you won't have so much trouble coming up with things that you're working on. And then the diversity, cultural diversity of the organization. This is, you're in good company on this challenge. I don't think any of us have the appropriate cultural diversity represented in advisory efforts. Some things we're thinking about and our compensation work group is thinking about is the resources, and if we're providing stipends and things like that, are we going to be able to reach folks that are otherwise marginalized, and when we think about volunteerism. So this is an ongoing conversation, and we'll continue to bring it forward to you as we learn more. All right, next slide. Individual advisor challenges. So a customer service effort. I really want to encourage you, again, to be intentional about how you're developing and moving, even if you've got an existing council that's struggling. Think about how you've set that up. Is it in the customer service vein where we're so grateful to have you, here's a nice dinner, and these are all the great things we're doing, and we want you to know about these so you could spread them in the community. That's going to lag after a little bit of time. It also sets you up to be providing for. And this is about partnership. This is about a different perspective informing the work that you're doing. And so sometimes a customer service approach to advisors really limits the value in terms of the partnership that you're getting out. One organization we worked with, I sat in on an advisory meeting at this organization, and one of the advisors said to the facilitator, I can't believe we're having this dinner again. We've had this dinner the last 3 months. And I went, oh my goodness, the expectations are so off here, right? That this is about partnership. This is about working together. This is not about dinner. So again, making sure that you're really providing enough space for true partnership and value. Be very clear about who the lead is. Unrealistic expectations. If you've got an advisor who's sort of, wants to do away with the social work department because that will solve all the problems in the hospital, that's unrealistic. And it's unrealistic expectations of what the scope of your advisory program is. So have a one-to-one conversation, go back to your charter, go back to your organization and how it's set up, and reset those expectations of what the advisor role is. Advisory councils turned into support groups. We're moving away from this. I saw this a lot more about 10 years ago than I see it now, but this is not a place for folks to gain the support that they may very well need. And oftentimes peer support groups are can feed advisory efforts, but they're not the same thing. So making sure we stay distinct on that. And then lack of leadership. If we've got a great, robust council, we've got a great facilitator, but we have no connection to the leadership of the organization, that's a trouble spot. So making sure that the advisors know individually how you are connecting with the organization at large. So I think I kind of covered all of those. If you do have advisors who are leaving and it hasn't worked out for you, I strongly encourage an exit interview. If you've got folks that just aren't showing up anymore, and really find out why. Lots of times it's because of personal circumstances and things happen, we understand that, but you want to know about that. Because if it's something that's about the structure of the group, you also want to know that so that you can improve that for the next round. So setting expectations, transparency about what's possible, about how improvement happens in your organization, being connected to the strategic priorities, and inviting a partnered approach to build together, all of those things. Oh, the last thing, the parking lot. Go ahead, Lindsay. I'm getting short on time. The parking lot is a great tool for meetings. So if you've got advisors who are kind of all over and aren't sure, continue to build towards those strategic goals, but you may get some great ideas that you want to capture as well. Be sure you always have a parking lot in your meetings so that people can put their ideas that may not be directly related to the topic onto a parking lot and know that it's not going to get lost, know that, you know, that sort of has been heard. So I'll leave you with this slide. I think it's a lot of what we've been discussing, and I see that we're all already out of time. I have a little bit more time if anybody has a question, but I also want to be respectful of everybody else's time.
Just really quickly, I just wanted to browse through these resources that are available, the PFA network, for your advisors that you're partnering with. I have the facilitation video that we shared today and the guide, and we can share all of these resources and follow up. And finally, I wanted to announce the Gateways to Patient Family Advisor Program Bootcamp that will be held on June 11th and 12th in Southern California at the Old Ranch Country Club in Seal Beach, California. This is a systematic approach to help organizations engage with patient family advisors through an advisory council or a different type of program, engaging advisors onto committees or improvement teams. But anyone partnering with advisors or advisory councils can really benefit from this program. So if you would like more information or would like to participate, please chat in or reach out to either myself or Libby, and we will be having some more information and registration open very soon.
And we would also invite you to let us know how we're doing with these workshops and what other topics you might need in your work, what other resource we might be able to provide. So we encourage you to reach out, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.